Dead Air Studios presents The Pain Chaser 1, Ambuscade, by Patrick E. Malloy, read for you by the author. This recording is released under a Creative Commons 4.0 license, so feel free to share it with your friends or enemies, but always give appropriate credit. This story is not intended for children and contains profanity, violence, and disturbing content that some people may find offensive. If you're in doubt, please turn back now, as you may find that some doors, once opened, refuse to be shut. "11. Tabby fled from the scene in a blind panic, never once looking back, leaving Rob to his fate. She would convince herself in the time that followed that the decision to do so had been one of logic, that obviously the monster that had been attacking him was too powerful for her to have been able to make a difference, and not fleeing would only have resulted in her death as well. As accurate as this fact was, logic had been the last thing on Tabby's mind at the time. Blind panic had been the only thing tangible to her in those moments. She sprinted recklessly with no clear destination in mind, naked and painted in blood. Her footfalls echoed wetly in the corridors, leaving a trail of crimson footprints in her wake. She passed the library on her left, oblivious to the changes that had taken place there. Had she looked, she would have seen that a room that less than half an hour earlier had been an enormous empty breath was now carpeted and filled with row upon row of bookshelves choked with dusty and worn volumes, all of which had literally erupted up from the floor out of nothingness. In the passage ahead, she came to a sudden stop as a disembodied voice suddenly spoke only feet from where she currently stood. "So, you decided to come back, did you?" it asked. Tabby looked around, her fracturing mind trying to make sense of the situation, desperately searching for the origin of the voice. "They're never going to let you live, you know. Not after the shit you pulled," it added after a second. There was an odd shimmer in the air now, like summer heat rising off a blacktop. Tabby experienced a moment of vertigo as a strange ripple in the air set everything in motion. It was as if somehow for a moment reality had become liquid and a wave had moved through it. Then another voice spoke, with a hiss like a rattlesnake. "I'm not here to ask the council for forgiveness," it said. "Shit! He's got a gun! Run!" the first voice yelled suddenly. "She was mine!" the second voice bellowed, rising into a growl. "You had no right to take her from me! She was mine, you motherfuckers! Now you're all gonna burn." There was a sound like a small cannon firing, and the air in front of Tabby literally exploded. A plume of blood and other matter burst from the nothingness directly in front of her. She brought her hands up to protect herself, but miraculously it passed harmlessly through her as if she were made of smoke, and showered substantial gore in a spreading puddle on the floor behind her. Her hands fell to her sides, and she screamed. It was the scream of a woman lost on the ocean, a cry of despair. Only Tabby's ocean was madness, and the shore was getting further and further away. There was a second report, and more of the spectral blood sprayed across the locker bank to her right, in a long splash that ran down the metal in long rivulets. "Run!" the second voice cried with sadistic laughter in its tone. "Run away! Scuttle to your little holes like the insects you love so much!" Taking the cue as if the voice had been speaking to her, she sped away. Her overstressed mind already unable to deal with what she'd been through, it rejected this new development outright. Her flight coincidentally took her to the very stairwell where Annie had twisted her ankle running from the creature earlier. Instead of heading up to the second floor, she noticed a dark alcove beneath the stairs where she could hide. She crouched inside and hugged her knees close, shivering in part from fear and in part from the cold, but mostly from shock. Her nerves had been pushed to their absolute limit. The world seemed to have turned against her. Nothing made sense anymore. What had once been a place of reason had in one day wholly been turned on its head. Her world was now one populated with unspeakable miscreations and impossible occurrences. She knew that if she survived this ordeal, she would never be the same person again, that she could never live a normal life. Another shudder of unreality spread over her in a wave. moving over the surface of the physical world as if it were being strained through a membrane. She didn't even question it this time. In fact, she could actually see its baleful pattern as it spread over the surfaces of the stairwell and up to the second floor. That pattern was evident in the way that it changed things. There was even a noise that accompanied it. A low groaning, only audible in the silence of the room. She could see the new iron support bars that held up the railing along the stairs twist and shift as if aging decades in seconds, layering over with the rust and decay of time. The building was piece by piece changing from a newly built edifice into one that had seen a great deal of wear and tear, and where things had long since begun to break down. In short, the new Kettle Creek High School was being supplanted by the one of old, a place that had seen its share of horrors. Tabby saw all of this, and none of it. Her mind focused instead on one detail. The railing support above her had come loose from its fitting when it changed. The iron bar looked as though it could easily be pried loose from the railing, and she would have an improvised weapon with which to defend herself. She took a tentative step out and pried loose her prize, but at that moment she noticed with dismay that a trail of vague footprints outlined in blood led right to her hiding spot. If the monster was following, it would lead him directly to her. Her mind reeled as she tried to think of what she should do, but the thought was short-lived as she realized with sudden terror from a movement in her peripheral vision that the door to the stairwell was opening, and someone was coming through. She did the only thing she could do. She scrambled back into the alcove under the stairs and clutched the iron bar to her chest. The creature shuffled into the room and stopped a foot from where she hid. She imagined it was studying the footprints on the floor, and that the seconds that passed now were among the handful that she had left. It need only look a foot to its left and she would be revealed. Truthfully, it was impossible to tell where the creature was looking. Its face was so indecipherable, with one eye of rumination and the other an empty shield of glass. It could have been looking anywhere or nowhere. The creature lifted its dog-like head as if sniffing the air. She clamped her hand over her mouth and quit breathing. Could it smell her? She was stung with a sudden absurd fear that it could somehow hear her thoughts. Then, suddenly, unbelievably, it was moving away. It paced slowly to the foot of the stairs and began to climb. There was a long, tense moment as the stairs above her creaked with its weight. Ancient dirt and debris sprinkled down onto her and stung her eyes. Then the door upstairs was opening, and it was gone. She began to cry. Pushed to her absolute limit, Tabby found her thoughts going back to Vanessa, her daughter. She realized that in all the time she spent in this nightmare, she'd been thinking only of herself. She and Vanessa had never had a stable relationship. Somewhere inside herself, Tabby had always believed that there would be time to fix that, to be a better mother. Now she was forced to face the fact that time may be running out.
"I'll come home, baby,"
she whispered.
"I promise."
She gripped the bar so hard that her fingernails bit into her flesh. Anton, David, and Annie made their way slowly down the hallway. They slowed their pace to match Annie's, whose injuries forced her to favor her left foot. She still used the axe as a makeshift crutch. She knew that they were putting themselves in considerable danger to help her, but neither of them complained, and she felt a deep affection for both men. Before this ordeal, she had regarded Anton as an eccentric. The looks he gave her, if he paid any attention at all, were disturbingly lecherous, and his obsession with the macabre had outright frightened her. She'd always seen fit to avoid him if she could, but in the past few hours, he had shown more backbone than she would have given him credit for, and she was thankful to have him there to support her. In the face of extreme opposition, he had been the first to do something to try to better their chances by studying the Book of Adumbril Verses. In her time of greatest need, he and David both had come to her aid and saved her from that horrible monster. That was something she would not soon forget. As for the other man, she saw David Archer as an outright godsend. He'd been thrown into this nightmare without a clue of what to expect, and had very soon after been forced to watch his partner die horribly. Never once did he protest or falter in his duty to try to protect them. Even after they'd been split up when the creature attacked, he had stayed with Anton and begun searching for the others. His bravery was something she admired fiercely, and it gave her the strength to push forward. They had talked it over a bit more and decided that the best course of action was to find Rob and Tabby. If the 5 of them could stick together from now on, they would have a much better chance of surviving. And so they began to search systematically. The search did not take long. They came across Tabby's bloody footprints almost at once. "Look at this," Anton said. David knelt to examine them more closely. "This isn't good," he said. "One of them's hurt badly. And from the shape and size of the footprints, I'd say it's the woman." "Tabby," Anton reminded him. "Well, you know what's really weird? Tabby isn't wearing any shoes." The trio followed the diminishing footprints into the stairwell. David in the lead with his gun drawn and held at waist height. As soon as they entered the room, he gave them the signal to stay behind him. "Tabby," he said in a loud but calm voice, "I know you're here. It's safe to come out now. It's Officer Archer, and I have your friends Annie and Anton with me." A long moment passed and Anton started forward. "Maybe she's hurt bad," he said. But David put his hand up to hold Anton back and shook his head. "Tabby," he called again. "Everything is all right. Just step out where we can see you. We're here to help you." Another long pause, and then, suddenly, Tabby lunged into the open. She was brandishing the iron rod, and the look in her eyes was feral. She was naked and covered in blood, but otherwise looked unhurt. "What the?" Anton said, not finishing the thought. Seeing that it was her, David lowered the gun, but did not remove his hand from the trigger. "Okay, Tabby, put the pipe down," he said. Her eyes darted from one face to another. She made no move to drop the rod. "Tabby, please put down your weapon. We're not here to hurt you."
Tabby, it's us.
Annie said. The look in the other woman's eyes frightened her. It was the look of a cornered animal. David began to walk toward her, gun lowered and his hand outstretched. Good, he said in a low voice. "Just give me the pipe." She lunged forward, swinging the rod in a vicious arc that connected with David's elbow. Crying out in pain, he dropped his gun. It hit the ground and went off, with a whip crack that made Anton throw himself to the ground.
"You're not gonna get me, you fucking bastard!"
Tabby screamed at the wounded cop, hissing and spitting like a cat.
"I won't let you!"
David dove for the gun with his good arm, snatching it up and training it on the crazed woman. She brandished the rod at him evilly. It was a strange sight, a woman completely nude, splattered with blood and waving an iron rod like a monkey with a stick. Her face contorted with an odd mixture of maniacal laughter and frightened sobs. Over his shoulder, David could see Anton pulling himself to his feet. "Are you shot? Did you get hit?" David asked him. "No," Anton said. "No, but I think I shit my pants." Annie threw herself into their midst, putting her hands up between Tabby and David.
"This is crazy," she said. "Dave, put the gun down."
"Annie," he said, "get away from her. She's crazy."
"She's not crazy. She's scared. Look at her."
Annie turned toward Tabby, and David lowered the gun slightly.
"It's me, Tabby. It's Annie. We're not gonna hurt you, I promise."
Tabby looked at her for a long moment, eyes uncomprehending, then slowly lowered the rod to her side.
"That's right,"
Annie said.
"We're not going to hurt you. Can you say my name, Tabby?" "Annie?"
Tabby asked with the tone of a child.
"That's right. That's good. It's gonna be okay now." "Annie, it killed him. It killed him, and it's gonna kill me,"
she said. Annie's heart lurched. It killed him? She must mean Rob. She didn't let it show in her face. Instead, she said,
"I know, but you're okay now. We're gonna make sure it doesn't do that."
Tabby ran forward, letting the rod fall to the floor with a clatter, and threw herself into Annie, hugging her and crying, almost knocking her to the floor. Annie cradled her with her one good arm and held her there, running her hand through the woman's hair like a child.
"Shh, I'm here."
David shook his head in disbelief and lowered his gun. He rubbed his elbow where she'd hit him. It wasn't broken, but it was going to leave one hell of a bruise.
"She's shivering like mad,"
Annie said over her shoulder to the men. "Why is she naked?" Anton asked.
"I have no idea. Does it really matter? We can't leave her like this."
"There are warm blankets back in the chopper," David said. We could grab a med kit while we're there, too. I'll take Anton with me. You stay here with her. Aren't you the one that said we should stick together? Anton asked David.
She's not fit to move on just yet.
Annie told Anton.
You go ahead. We'll be fine. The helicopter's right outside.
But if that thing comes, he started.
If that thing comes, we have the axe.
Annie insisted. She's right, man, David said. Tabby's in shock. We need to warm her up. We'll just go and come back. Anton nodded his agreement. Okay, he said, but I still don't like it. I'm not asking you to, David told him. I don't like it either. I just need you to help me out here. Annie's hurt. We shouldn't leave her alone, he deliberated.
Go, Anton,
Annie said, beaming at him. His concern made her like him that much more.
We need some girl time,
she said. Finally, Anton looked primed to go. David gave him a curt nod and then turned back to Annie. You be careful, he said.
You too.
Then the boys were running again.
If you're listening to this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. And if you like what you've heard so far, please consider supporting my Patreon. I try to do this for free, but I do have to support myself somehow. Also, physical copies of my books are available on